Some say that alongside this see it to believe it world is the shadowy realm of the supernatural. Sometimes the residents of that dimension touch us, and in one moment, our lives are changed forever. America's Lady of Supernatural Thrillers, Mary Ann Pohl, is your real Ghost Chatter host. On this podcast, you'll hear stories by real people who have seen real ghosts. Gordon tells us about an unwelcome encounter with his dead father-in-law. And Lori tells us about a dead logger who looked for his wife and daughter for years after his death, until she helped him find peace. Then there's Victoria, who shares her story of a long-dead pig, Edna June, who still watches over her ranch. Did you know a cafe in Anchorage, Alaska is haunted by the ghost of a woman who was blown to bits by a hired hitman? Once in a while, Mary Ann will podcast a tale taken from the genre she loves best, the supernatural. These are just a few of the stories you will hear, and these stories just keep coming. Welcome to today's Real Ghost Chatter episode.
Welcome to Real Ghost Chatter. I'm Mary Ann Pohl, America's Lady of Supernatural Thrillers, and a charter member of Author Masterminds. Our guest today is Bob Freeman. Bob is an occult detective, artist, game designer, and author whose published novels include Shadows Over Somerset, Keepers of the Dead, and Descendant. A lifelong student of mythology, folklore, magic, and religion, Freeman has written numerous short stories, articles, and reviews for various online and print publications, and is a respected lecturer on the occult and paranormal phenomena. He is currently working on the Occult Detective role-playing game and an RPG/board game hybrid for a major intellectual property. He lives in rural Indiana with his wife Kim and son Connor. You can find him online at occultdetective.com, on Twitter at the @% occult-detective, and on Facebook, you can find him at facebook.com/author Bob Freeman. His last name is spelled Freeman. Have you heard about Anchor? If you haven't, I'm here to tell you it's the easiest way to make a podcast. Let me explain. It's free, and I mean free. I haven't paid a dime to produce or distribute my podcasts. There's a creation tool that allows you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or computer. How easy is that? Podcast distribution can be a headache, but not with Anchor. Anchor distributes your podcast for you so it can be heard on Spotify, Apple Podcast, and many, many more. As a bonus and not an obligation, you can make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership. Anchor has everything you need to make a podcast in one place. Download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started. So welcome to the show, Bob.
Thank you, Mary Ann. Thank you for having me.
Oh, glad to have you here. You have many stories. I know you do. And I know we're not going to be able to talk about a whole bunch of them today. Maybe we'll come back another time and do a second one. But I'm going to ask you first, how did you begin your paranormal investigations?
Well, I started as a child, but we could roll forward a little bit. In 1983, when I was in high school, some friends of mine became involved in some things out at the Mississinawa Reservoir, which is an artificial dam and lake that was created in the 60s. And there are many supernatural hotspots in that area, including a place called Seven Pillars. Seven Pillars was a sacred site to the Miami Indians, and they held rituals there, and they believed that location was a vortex that took you from our world into the afterlife. So we spent a lot of time there, and we performed a lot of seances, Ouija board activity, and explored all the various abandoned houses in the area. I was reared on ghost stories from the Ozarks. My parents and grandparents were all from Arkansas, transplanted to Indiana in the 50s.
Mm-hmm.
And so they filled my head with stuff like Rawhead Rex and Bloody Bones and all those great ghost stories, that were brought over actually from Europe, but became kind of central to that Southern lifestyle, and that's what I was raised on.
Mm-hmm.
So I formed my first paranormal group in 1983. We called ourselves the Night Stalkers after the Carl Kolchak show.
Oh, loved that show.
We had loved kids. So that's when it all began, and here we are.
From what I understand, you've had many, many experiences.
It's true, yeah. So I saw my first full-bodied apparition in 1974.
And where were you?
I lived on the corner of my grandparents' horse farm in a fen along Turkey Creek. And about a quarter mile from where we lived was a cemetery that had a really neat urban legend centered around it. There was not a very large lot, but there was a fence surrounding it with a very wide gate. And since the 50s, people would go out to that cemetery, and if a woman would walk through the gate would open of its own accord and let them pass. And if a male walked up to it, the gate would open and then it would slam into them. And it got so bad that they ended up removing the gate because people were getting injured. So I lived next to this place. So as an 8-year-old boy, I would sneak out of the house and I would go up and spend my evenings in that graveyard because I was hungry to catch a ghost. And I would climb up in the big shade tree that was in the center of the cemetery and kind of, hunker down in the crook of the tree. And one night I got what I was looking for, which was a full-bodied apparition that came up out of the corner of the cemetery and kind of just drifted across. And from then on, I was hooked. So.
And was it a woman or a man? Could you tell?
I couldn't really tell. I know at the time I believed it was a female, but it really wasn't defined enough to be able to tell. I could see arms and legs and movement. I could see, the head, but it wasn't a solid enough form.
Got it.
But so where it had come out of, there were 4 tombstones, very aged, all from the early 1800s. And they had all died within a couple of days each other and were aged from, I'm going from memory here, but like maybe 6 years old up to 30.
Mm-hmm.
And so, that was odd that they'd all died so close together. But I did a little research, and there was a smallpox epidemic at the time that took out a lot of people in the local area. So I confident that was probably one of them that was still there and trapped there. And I don't live but maybe a mile and a half from there now. So I still stop out there from time to time, though I haven't seen an apparition there in years. So.
Oh, that's amazing, though. That's a really fun story for an 8-year-old who was very brave, by the way. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I was a farm kid, right? So.
Right.
My dad, when I was little, and so right around that age, every Halloween he took me out to what was called the Murder House of Liston Glen, and that was out along the Mississinawa Reservoir. And it was an old dilapidated farmhouse. The legend around that location was that a man who had, lost everything, he was depressed and he murdered his wife and children in that house and then hung himself. So my dad would take me out there every year at Halloween and would try to get the ghost of the murderer to come forward. And so, so as a little kid, I was just kind of thrown into that. So I thought that's the way things were, it's it didn't seem abnormal to me. So
God, my dad would never do something like that. Darn. I would have loved it.
I'm upset with him. He passed away just shy of 2 years ago, and he had promised me that he would come visit me. after he passed, and he hasn't showed up yet. So,
Well, a rascal. Maybe he just decided to go to heaven and stay there.
Exactly. I figure he got to the other side and said, heck with that kid.
Yeah.
Moving on.
I'll see him soon enough.
Right.
Yeah, I know. You had mentioned a story you might want to share with us, and I didn't know if you wanted to share that or another one.
Yeah, okay. So I was going to talk about a local building in my little small town I live in, population of about 1,200 people.
Mm-hmm.
They don't want me to say the name of the place,
Okay.
but it was an old Oddfellows Lodge originally, and now a charitable organization owns the building and runs it. So let's see, almost exactly 14 years ago, I think we're a week shy from the anniversary, I was at home in bed, and I got a phone call from the board president, and he asked me to come up to the location.
Mm-hmm.
I thought, well, somebody had tried to break into the building. They were needing help. So I went up, and they had actually had overnight guests, and those guests had experienced strange goings on as they spent the night there. They heard footsteps on the third floor. They heard footsteps descending the stairway. They heard it cross the hall. And then at their door, the bedroom they were sleeping in, the door handle started shaking. So the husband gets out of bed and he walks over to it, opens it up, and nobody's there. So the reason that the board president had asked me up there was because he knew my interest in the paranormal. And he asked me if I would have my group come up and investigate the building for him, because they had lots of guests that stayed there, and they were concerned, that it might be something dangerous, perhaps even, or I think maybe too, they were wanting to maybe calm the nerves of people who would stay there. They were hoping maybe that I would say, "Oh, it's fine."
Right.
Right.
Yeah. I understand.
So that weekend, my group and I, we investigated, and we set up our equipment, and we're prowling around. And this building was built in the 1860s, and then it was renovated in the 1880s by the Oddfellows. That's when they added the third story to the building.
Mm-hmm.
So they had put their lodge on that third floor. So that's where their ritual chambers were. They've this grand ballroom, and it's all in ruins now. I should tell you, the wallpaper on the ceiling is all peeling, and it has a very creepy vibe to it. Mm-hmm. And all the floors are warped, and it's very unnerving. Mm-hmm. So we're walking around, and I approach this closet, which we later learned this was where new members of the Oddfellows Lodge would be placed, and they'd sit in the dark before being brought out for their initiation. The initiation would consist of them being placed inside a coffin with a human skeleton and then locked inside. And then when they were removed from the coffin, they would be reborn, resurrected into the order. So anyway, so as I'm approaching this closet, I'm the hairs on my arms kind of standing up, and I'm feeling that something's not right. And I'm looking inside, and there's an old light cord hanging from the ceiling, and it's spinning counterclockwise.
Oh, wow.
And nobody had been in there, right? So it's just sitting there rotating, and I'm like, oh, that's odd. And I'm trying to determine, is there a breeze? Is there something going on? And that's when something hit me.
You mean really hit you?
A physical force strike me in the chest.
Oh, wow.
And I'm like, and it felt like it was trying to reach inside of me. You could feel it, like the kind of tendrils kind of poking into you like fingers.
Right.
And so I yell, for my companions, and they come running into the room, and a black mask appeared in front of me in roughly the shape of a human being. Mm-hmm. And we proceeded to chase this figure around that third floor for the next half hour. Wow. Before it finally dissolved into the shadows. But it kept moving, and it would enter a shadow, and then it'd reappear over by a doorway. So we were like, oh, this is a big deal, So I've been investigating there now for almost 14 years. They had me coming in almost every weekend. After a couple of years, I started bringing other groups in to investigate the building as well. One group, well, more than one, but one group in particular, we set up cameras on the second floor hallway, and we caught a full-bodied apparition stepping out of one of the rooms. It stops and it looks right at the camera, standing in the hall, and then it just disappears. And then it starts blocking our IR camera.
Wow.
You know, it's invisible, but it's breaking that light. And it's some of the best footage I've ever seen. And we were all outside while this was happening. And then about a year later, another group set up cameras in the same location, and their cameras were a little different, but they caught a full shadow figure standing in the exact same place where we'd caught the other. It turned and started walking down the stairs, down towards the first floor. So that was two great video evidence that were caught there. We've captured thousands of EVPs in the place. It'd be hard to describe all the different experiences in that one location that we've had just in the last decade and a half. So,
wow, that is astounding. Do you have that on your website? Any of that video?
No, but it is on YouTube.
Okay, because I bet people would love to go see that.
Yeah. So if you do a search for me on YouTube, you'd be able to find that evidence and take a look at it. Okay. It is well worth a look. Yeah.
It would be. I'm going to go look. So you just search for Bob Freeman?
Yeah. It should be under Bob Freeman, Occult Detective. If you look that up, you should be able to find the video easy enough. I wish I had readily available, but it should be easy to find.
Okay, great. That'd be great for people to go see. Because, you said something in there about ley lines too. So there were vortexes in this same building?
Yeah, that's the same building, and that's what I believe is going on there. I mapped out the whole area, and you can draw a line from the 7 pillars up through where this building is, and it stretches to another sacred site at the Mound State Park in Anderson. The mounds there, plus other converging lines as well. I think it falls right on a vortex, and I think that's what's going on there. I think there's a portal that probably the Oddfellows opened up.
I was wondering, right? That was going to be my question.
Yeah, I don't know how familiar you are with the Oddfellows.
I'm not at all familiar with the Oddfellows.
They're a fraternal organization, very altruistic. Great. It's a great organization. But one of the things they would do whenever they would move into an area and set up a lodge, they would buy a large plot of land and they would start a cemetery. That's why you see IOOF cemeteries everywhere. That's what IOOF stands for, is Independent Order of Oddfellows.
I did not know that.
Yep. And here in Indiana, there's Oddfellows cemeteries everywhere. Of course, they've all been renamed now because, the order isn't as prevalent as it used to be.
Right.
Thanks to things like the internet, which people don't join social clubs much anymore. So.
Right.
But that's, the death and death rituals were very big in what they did. So it's not hard to extrapolate that something went awry perhaps during one of their rites or something at the very least, because the wall between, here and there was thinner because of, that ley line activity. That, maybe something just took notice and crossed over then, and then it's hard to say.
Well, if they're doing rituals, it takes a certain ritual to open a portal, if I'm right. Am I wrong about that?
Yes, but,
there's several different rituals. I understand that, but a certain type of ritual is what I'm saying.
Right, there are ways for it to happen. So,
okay.
But we don't know what they were doing.
Right.
It's because you're talking, the 1800s, and our records are pretty spotty, but it is intriguing that for a town, like I said, of roughly 1,200 people, and the population was about the same then, a little less, but when you look at their rosters, they would have over 300 people signing in.
Wow.
And that's all over the state.
Wow.
And I thought, well, why are they coming here to Converse? We're a tiny little town,
right?
Yeah, but we had a gas boom, and there was all kind of things going on.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's kind of like Jefferson, Texas is one of the most haunted places there are. Same thing about having a big boom in the place, and it was one of the deadliest towns in Texas at the time, because it was a different kind of boom, because this was a boom about Caddo Lake. Caddo Lake it's the only natural lake in Texas, which is actually a swamp. So it used to go from Jefferson to New Orleans. So there was a huge boom during the time. There was a raft that kept it was a natural raft, kind of a dam that kept it open so they could do this. And when they broke down that dam, it destroyed the economy.
Wow.
Yeah, because you couldn't get to New Orleans anymore. And it's a wonderful story. And it's just the same idea that you just have all this prosperity, and I don't know what happened in the Wild West, and prosperity, and then killings, and then you add Oddfellows, and I bet you've got a heck of a deal going on.
Right. Yeah.
So it's like,
Well, I should tell your listeners that all this month on my website, I'm doing what I call #Occult30.
Mm-hmm.
And so every day I'm posting a true story.
Oh,
from
fun.
my, years of adventuring.
Okay.
And I'm encouraging people to take part in it as well.
Okay.
So let's see what I told a story today about these abandoned houses out at the Mississinawa that I explored. So after telling that story, then I encourage you, well, have you ever experienced something in an abandoned house, and that type of thing. So trying to start up a dialogue, and of course I would choose to do that when we're in the middle of the current turmoil we're under, coronavirus and protests and riots.
Right.
So,
well,
people have other things on their mind. So, but hopefully, my thought was, well, here's a distraction, so that you're not just totally focused on all that bad news. Well, here's something that you can spend, a half hour on and kind of step away from that for a bit. And if you have a paranormal bent and enjoy that sort of thing, well, maybe it's something that you'd be interested in.
That is really cool. Thank you for sharing that for the listeners. When it's #Occult, is it 30 or
yes?
Okay.
Yeah, #Occult30, and so it's for the 30 days of June.
Okay, great.
So there have been 3 posts so far, and we'll have a fun little story tomorrow. I'll give you a sneak peek at it.
Oh.
Okay. So just outside of Converse, I lived in a house in what was called Belgium Town. It was called that because there used to be all these glass factories out there because of the gas boom. So Belgium Town was where all these people from Belgium lived because they were all glass blowers. So anyway, I lived in this little house. This was in the early 90s. And whenever I would walk down the hallway of the house, I would get just a cold chill. It was like just walking through a cold spot. And I'd been around enough of them to recognize that there's something unnatural here. On the wall, there was kind of like an odd bump in the wall, like where you patch over plaster.
Right, right.
So I'm trying to find out. I'm trying to make a contact with whatever spirit it might be. I'm not getting anywhere. And then one day I'm talking to a relative who's a construction worker, and I mentioned that patch on that wall. And he said, well, you know what happened there, right? No, I don't. Well, back in the early 60s, a gentleman came home to his wife in that house, and they get into an argument. And he says, fine. And he leaves and he goes out drinking. And when he comes home that night, she's standing there waiting for him with a shotgun.
Oh, geez.
And so she shoots and blows his ear off. He takes the shotgun away from her and shoots her through the chest and punches her through that wall.
Wow.
That's what that plaster patch was where they patched over where she had broken the wall when the force of the shotgun threw her in it. He was convicted, and he died in prison of liver failure. So that was, there's a little sneak peek of what I'll be talking about.
The story's fantastic.
Yeah. But that's the kind of stuff I fall into, right? So like, I just was renting this house. I mean, it was just like, oh, great, so.
Yeah, you're just kind of.
I don't know if I'm sniffing the stuff out or if it just follows me, So.
I have a feeling you're just kind of intuitive to it,
Yeah.
I don't. It sounds like you're getting a bunch of different spirits. I don't know if any are following you or not, but it sounds like you've had bunches of different ones. I would assume that means you just walked into a house and found another one. That's what it sounds like.
Well, I suppose, yeah, I go, I'm looking for a place to live. I go in and look at a place that's up for rent. And I go, oh, yeah, this one would be great.
Yeah, this feels good. Maybe you want to go the next time. If it feels good, walk away. I'm kidding you. I know people are really interested in paranormal investigations, and advice do you give people who's come up to you, who I'm sure have, and said, hey, I want to be an investigator. How do I start? What do you tell them?
It's really simple, right? Because all the tools you need, you already have, right? So you just need to be able to sit quietly and need to listen and have empathy, and now, granted, most people do have empathy. The best way to start is just be able to listen. And because of television, there is a paranormal research group just about on every block of every town. They're everywhere. It's one of the funny things I always talk about is that where I live, we don't have cable TV, right? So I had never heard of like ghost hunters. I'm out and I'm doing what I always do. I'm out hunting for spirits in various locations. And I was out at a place called Okefenokee. And there's these guys out there and they have K2 meters and stuff. And I'm like, oh, hey, what are you guys doing? Oh, well, yeah, that's great. Yeah, hey, that's what I do. And so it was nice. And then a week later, I'm out at a local place that we call Hobbitland, doing the same thing. And I run into another group of people and they also have K2 meters. And I'm like, well, that's really odd. And they said, well, yeah, well, you watch Ghost Hunters. What's that? It's like, okay. So I went for 20 some years and never running into another ghost hunter, right? And then all of a sudden they're everywhere. And now they really are everywhere. And so the best thing, if you're interested and want to go out, contact one of your local groups. They're almost always willing to allow people to go on ride-alongs. But you don't need to buy all the fancy equipment that you see on TV. I don't really buy into most of it anyway. I still kind of hunt old school. I use dowsing rods and compasses and analog recorders and all that kind of stuff. So there's no reason to be, to think, oh, I need the, thermal cameras and right. I mean, they're fun toys.
Oh yeah.
But you don't need that. All you really need are your eyes and your ears and a willingness to be open to what you might experience.
Okay, that is great advice. I'm probably one of the only people that doesn't want to go and do paranormal investigations. Just saying. I'm the one that wants to hear about it, and I write a lot of paranormal, and I've had experiences, but I'm the person that goes, hey, I've had enough. I don't need to go seek them out. Thanks.
Right.
I'm good. Just to go back to your story about the Oddfellow Lodge, were you able to console that board chairman at all and make him feel better about the place?
Not at all.
That's what I wondered.
But like I said, there's been so many occurrences there. It's funny. They have a sign-in board like on the wall where people like go up and sign their names and say, thank you for the great time we had, blah blah blah. Thanks for letting us stay here. And now when you read those and stuff, we made it without running into a ghost, or oh yeah, we saw an apparition in the hallway. You know that. So there's like all these like ghost related messages left on there now.
That's so
So
funny.
I think they're at peace with it. It is what it is, right? So.
Well, and it hasn't killed anybody or hurt anybody yet, has it?
Well, other than people on the third floor, people get scratched on occasion and that kind of stuff.
You don't want to go up there. That's what I say, unless you're doing what you're doing. You know what I mean? Because
right, exactly.
You're prepped for it. But I wouldn't be going up there for.
Yeah, they stay out. They stay away from that floor pretty much, and so so most of the stuff on the lower levels is benign. So I'll let you get it. Yeah, I mean, I'm sure you've been around it enough to know the majority of hauntings are residual. They're not intelligent. It's just like a tape that's playing and plays over and over again, repeating the same action.
Mm-hmm.
It's the intelligent haunts that you got to pay extra attention to, but that's part of the fun, I guess.
Well, part of the fun and the part of the challenge, and I don't guess it would be fun without a challenge. I can't imagine that. Yeah, I've only had the only ones I've ever had experiences with, and one of them was definitely an intelligent problem, two of them, and then the other one I don't know. You know what I mean? I don't know if it was residual or intelligent. That one I don't.
Right.
But I didn't go out asking for it, nor did I wanted to ask questions. And on the one that I wasn't sure which it was, I was home before I realized I'd had an experience. So I didn't even have a chance to think about it. I was out to dinner, minding my own business. You know what I mean? So it's like in a haunted restaurant. So my husband's like, "Oh, let's go there for my birthday." And I'm thinking, "No, let's not. You don't have experiences. I have experiences. No, let's not go back there."
I used to be a bartender in a haunted tavern.
Mm-hmm.
And it was really exciting, because you never knew what was going to happen. Usually it was people would get touched in the bathroom, or the waitresses would go and the saloon doors would swing open for them, as they would go to, carrying drinks, and occasionally they would get touched in inappropriate places. Yeah, but that was a fun place.
Some entities are really actually have well-mannered.
Yes, some are, yes.
And then some are not.
And others aren't, yeah.
Yes. They feel they can do what they want, I imagine.
Yeah, well, I mean, they're people. So, so people come in all stripes. So.
Isn't that the truth?
Except for the ones that aren't. Yeah.
Yeah, right.
Some
Except for the ones
people.
that aren't. That's right.
Yeah.
Those are the ones that you really have to watch for.
Right.
Yeah. I just so enjoyed this conversation, and I'm hoping that in a couple of months or a month, you and I can do another podcast and share some more stories. I would love that.
That would be great.
Okay.
Thank you so much for having me.
It's great. And I just want to say a few more things before we sign off. And so I'm just going to say this does conclude today's podcast. And I have many thanks for sharing your story, Bob. I really enjoyed it. You can find more out about Bob and his writings, as I said, at occultdetective.com. And if you enjoyed this podcast, I encourage you to share it with others you think would also be interested. If you have a supernatural encounter to share on Real Ghost Chatter, please contact me at maryann@maryanpoll.com. And if you'd like to know more about me, go to maryanpoll.com and or authormasterminds.com/MARY-ANN-POLL. Until next time, may the wind always be at your back, the sun on your face, and the good Lord walk beside you.